can't cut government spending when you're in the middle of a recession. Meanwhile, here at home, Republican voters soundly rejected the longest-serving Republican senator. Richard Lugar lost after 36 years in the Senate to a guy by the name of Richard Murdoch, who believes that you should never compromise with Democrats. And finally, the largest, or at least one of the safest, supposedly, banks in the United States, J.P. Morgan Chase, lost $2 billion last week. Oops, on a single trade. A single trade made by the London Whale. Now, this was a man not nicknamed for his girth, but for his $100 billion trades that he would make on a daily basis. Should banks be making these kinds of trades when they know that if the bet goes well, they win a lot of money, and if it goes badly, they're going to depend on taxpayers for a bailout? To answer these questions, I've invited a long-running guest on the Inside Scoop. His name is Mike Lane. He's a Republican strategist. Welcome again to the Inside Scoop, Mike.
Mark, thank you for having me back.
Mike and I agree on very little except for the fact that it's important for Democrats and Republicans to talk to each other and to respectfully disagree. So let's start with President Obama's evolution on marriage equality. I happened to watch Meet the Press the day before, a week ago yesterday, and I'm quite confident that Joe Biden did not expect the question that he was going to be asked by David Gregory. In fact, he was asked the first question. He gave sort of a very calm, nice answer. But Gregory, to his credit, as a good reporter does, pushed him. And then President Obama, Vice President Biden, maybe it should have been Obama, Vice President Biden affirmed his comfortableness with marriage equality, thus putting the president behind the eight ball. Now, President Obama insists that he was going to come out in favor of marriage equality anyway, sometime before the Democratic convention, but Biden just sort of pushed the schedule ahead by a few weeks or months. You believe that?
I don't know, but I don't think it matters. It matters that the president made the decision. He's now out of the closet on marriage, and
yes,
so the question in my mind is how is it going to play, and for what reasons would he have done that? I think that when you look at this and the way this issue polls compared to the way it votes, there's a dichotomy there. The votes don't match the polls, and the polls don't match the votes, and so there's something going on there. I believe the president has looked at where he's going to be in November, what he has to do. He's abandoning the middle as irretrievable, and he's going after a high turnout on the left as his only path to victory, and that's why he did this.
I think he did this because he had no choice. I think he did this because Vice President Biden talked out of school. It's one of the things I love about Vice President Biden, by the way, is that this is a guy who, when asked a question, he says what he believes, even when it's not the most politic thing to say. So he did that. And President Obama kind of had to follow suit, lest he be seen as catching up behind his vice president.
He could have stonewalled for a while longer. Remember, he said his plan was to come out with it at some time prior to the convention. We have no way of knowing if that's true or not.
Right.
But what we do know is that by making this decision, it's not a decision that appeals to the 10% in the middle that's probably going to elect the next president. It's a decision that appeals to the Democratic base, and so therefore his strategy, to me, I interpret that as let's maximize the turnout on the left. That's our path to victory in November.
So you interpret it as strategizing it. I interpret it as a president who has been going through a long evolution. I mean, this is not news.
Oh, I don't think that.
He said back in 2010 that he was evolving on the matter. He talked, I think, quite honorably and very movingly about talking with his kids because they have friends that have gay parents.
Shades of Jimmy Carter getting his nuclear proliferation advice from Amy.
No, but marriage equality is not about nuclear proliferation. Marriage equality is about your friends and your family and your neighbors and talking to your wife and talking to your kids and talking to your neighbors and finding out that, he really is okay with it after all. I was also impressed that he cited religion. He talked about the golden rule, love thy neighbor as thyself, and saying that he felt this was a more important rule, and that so he sort of looked in his soul and found it that way. I think this was a principled thing, and frankly, I think it may hurt him politically. Let's face it, the way I've seen it, the vast majority of voters will not change on this. Most people that support marriage equality were going to vote for Obama anyway. Most people that are opposed to it were going to vote against him anyway. I don't think it'll change. It may change a few people, but to the extent that it does, the polls I've seen shows that it actually hurts him which suggests to me that he did this as a matter of principle, not politics.
It may hurt him. I don't, I don't.
States like North Carolina, certainly.
Yeah, I don't believe it was principle. Well, North Carolina was gone for the president anyway. That's just an irretrievable mistake.
He won it 4 years ago.
He did by 12,000 votes, and he was not going to win it again. He was going to lose it by at least 120,000, and now it's going to be more than that. I don't think, look, I'm going to half make you happy and half make you unhappy. I don't think there was any principle involved in this. I think it was purely political, but I think the president was in favor of gay marriage the first time around.
I agree with you.
That was when he hit his true feelings.
That I agree with you. I've always said that when he said evolution, that was wink, wink, nod, nod code word for, I support marriage equality, but I know that the majority of Americans don't, so I can't come clean on that at this time. But
he'll have more flexibility after the election.
I honestly, in fact, I think I predicted right here on this show that after he was reelected, he would come out in favor of marriage equality.
I recall that. I was your guest that night.
That's right. Well, I'm pleased that he did so beforehand because reporters raked his press secretary, Jay Carney, over the coals. Did you see that press conference?
Those are the days when you don't want to be a press secretary.
It was great.
Jay Carney actually made,
he did his best.
That was the worst press conference I've ever seen in my life.
He did his yeoman's best, but the point was the press was not going to let this go, and they were going to ask him day after day after day. And better that he come out 2 days after Vice President Biden than 2 weeks after Vice President Biden. Then he really would have been seen as being pushed around. So I think it was the right choice. Obviously, I agree with the principle. I also think it was the right political choice because, frankly, this is where he stands. And I think it's not surprising that the first Gallup polls that show Americans majority supporting marriage equality, that's the same year that the president supports marriage equality. And I got to say, and you know this as well, Mike, polls have moved more on this issue than probably any other issue faster in the last 15 years. Just 15 years ago, only a quarter of Americans supported marriage equality, and you can just watch the polls. I mean, you can see them. It steadily it goes up until now we're at 50%. I suspect in another 15 years we'll be at 70, 75%.
Well, it certainly is among the more volatile. There are a lot of volatile issues that we're going through now. It's certainly in the top 5 list of volatile issues. We'll see where it goes out. Your ultimate question was, does it help or hurt the president politically? The answer is, I don't think we know yet.
I don't think we know yet. I actually think it's more likely slightly to hurt him than help him, which is why I think he did it on principle, not on politics.
Well, we'll see. It didn't hurt him. Well,
it helped him with money raising.
Right. We all know there was a substantial amount of gay money sitting on the sidelines that came pouring in 24 hours after the announcement.
That is certainly true. Let me move on to another election that just happened, and this is one that Americans, I think, don't follow as much as our own, but I think is really telling, and that is the election of the President Hollande in France, along with a really strange election in Greece, and even a strange election in the Netherlands that's even less talked about. They all have their individual differences, but the heart of what I think the voters in you can't get 3 more different countries in Europe than France, the Netherlands, and Greece. I think we can all agree on that, both economically, socially, culturally. But all voters in all 3 of those countries agreed that in the middle of a recession, it's a bad time to be cutting government spending. That, yes, we need austerity at some point. Yes, we have to pay the money back. But when you have austerity, it cuts into economic growth. The voters made their choice very clear, and they're sending a very strong word to Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, that, Germany may be the most powerful country in the Euro, but if you force austerity down voters' throats, not only does it harm their economy, but they can't even pay back the money they owe because the economic growth is so bad. I think that's a lesson for us in the United States.
Well, let me take them one at a time. We'll start with Greece because I think our viewers probably know Greece the best. It's been the most.
It's the biggest basket case, to be sure.
It's the one most wide. Greece is dysfunctional. I mean, Greece ought to just tear it all up, declare that they're absolving themselves of all debts and start again. That's really their only way out of it.
And start again with the drachma. I firmly believe Greece should leave the euro.
Right. They have to leave the Eurozone.
I completely agree.
No functioning for them at all. It amazes me the way the Greeks can go to Germany with their hand out. They can beg Angela Merkel for a bailout for salvation. She gives them a lot of money with strings attached, and then they say, no, we hate you. We're not accepting your strings. Who are the Greeks kidding?
Well, let's be fair, though. Joining the Eurozone was really harmful to the Greeks. I mean,
yes, it's been harmful to every country over there. There's no country that's thriving in the European. I
agree. I hate the euro. That's one thing we agree on. It's interesting enough. But the problem with the euro is really quite simple. When Mississippi is in trouble, New York helps out Mississippi. One of the dirty secrets that we Democratic voters know is that in the blue states, we pay more to our government than we get back. And in the red states, they get a lot more back from the government. Mississippi gets $2 back for every dollar it pays in taxes, and New Yorkers get about 50 cents back for every dollar they pay in taxes.
Not a good deal for them.
No, the blue states subsidize the red states. But we do so because even though we may disagree with the red states, we recognize we're all one United States. Greece and Germany are not one nation. They're not even one continent in sense of politically.
Right.
Germany's not willing to bail out Greece the way New Yorkers bail out people from Mississippi.
Right. It's not the United States of Europe.
Exactly. And that's the lesson that maybe the people wanted it to be, but it's not that. And frankly, Greece should allow its currency to fluctuate with regard to Germany's. They have higher deficits, they have higher spending, they have different social mores, they don't have the same savings rate that Germany does. They're a different culture. And if the drachma were able to fluctuate, I think they would not even be in this economic mess that they're
Mark, Greece is a beautiful place. If you ever have a chance to take a mid cruise and make sure that you cruise the Greek islands, it's almost unparalleled in terms of its beauty and drama and things like that. It is a totally, completely dysfunctional country. They don't know how to govern themselves. Even if they get out of the Eurozone, they're just they're not going to function on their own.
Okay,
they're a basket case.
Fine. Greece is a basket case.
Let's skip the Netherlands.
Let's talk about France.
Let's go to France.
Because France obviously is one of the strongest economies in Europe. Not quite as strong as Germany, but Germany, England, Italy, France, those are the big four.
Europe is essentially Europe is in a double dip recession. And to say France is one of the stronger economies, what you're really saying is it's one of the lesser weak economies. I mean, it's not above a 5. It's like a 4 or 3.5.
The point is that the voters in France recognize, and I think they're right, that in a recession is the wrong time to do austerity. That when you have austerity, when you cut government spending in the middle of a recession, what does that do? It raises unemployment levels, it raises welfare payments, it causes the government to have to pay more money out because more people are suffering, and less money comes back in taxes because people are suffering. There is a time to cut government deficits, absolutely. That time is when the economy is strong. Under Bill Clinton in its last few years, we had a strong economy, and he was absolutely right to run a surplus, and you remember I supported the surplus at that time. But in a recession, it's the wrong time for austerity measures.
Mark, I'm amazed you're the only liberal I've ever heard admit that there is ever a time to cut the deficit. But that's
I argued that with you. You know that. I've always defended Bill Clinton.
I know, but I don't get it from any of your colleagues. Look,
all right.
Here's the lesson you take away from France. It's a bad year to be an incumbent. Sarkozy was... I
kind of like Sarkozy.
He made a lot of promises. He couldn't keep them. He had a nice wife. Okay, well, I'll go with that. But
they always do. They have nice mistresses too in France.
Well, perhaps. Anyway, the thing is, it's a bad time to be an incumbent. Sarkozy was tossed out because Europe is in a double dip recession, and they're not going to buy. Anybody who's in power during the recession is gone.
But the reason why Europe is in a recession, a double dip recession, is important. We didn't go into a double dip recession. Right here in the United States of America, Obama did a stimulus package, and we've had some slow growth out of it, but we're not in a double dip. I say to you, and I want you to know if you disagree, the reason why Europe is in a double dip is precisely because of these austerity measures where they cut government spending at the wrong time.
I don't think so, and let me quote President Obama, who said that the one thing that can push us back into a double dip recession here in the United States, which I think we're very close to because our economy now has essentially flatlined. We are just totally flatlined at this point. Obama himself said that the debt is the one thing that's going to drive us back into a double dip recession. We've got to do something about the debt, and the president refuses to exhibit any leadership at all on that issue.
The president has been very clear that the right way to deal with the debt is to deal in the long term with the debt. That in the short term, the president has also made very clear, unless he said something that I missed, and you'll have to quote me on, he said that in the short term, it's the wrong time. That's why he supported the payroll tax cuts. That's why he even extended the Bush tax cuts. He didn't want to extend them for the super rich because we all know that when they get more money, that doesn't contribute to the economy. But for the middle class and working class people, it's the wrong time to raise taxes on them because if you do, they will earn less and the economy will be harmed.
Exactly. It's the wrong time to raise taxes on anybody. I think what we need to do is get our spending under control.
No, it's the wrong time to cut spending,
too. We have a spending problem, Mark.
First of all, we have a tax problem, not a spending problem. The reason you know that is because in the Clinton years, we had massive surpluses. Now, the only thing that changed between the Clinton years and this year is the tax code and a couple wars. I mean, it's not because of entitlement spending. Medicare and Social Security and all of that, they were under Bill Clinton as well. But my point is this: cutting government spending is just as bad, indeed, it's worse than raising taxes. Because when you raise somebody's taxes, some of that money goes out of the economy. But when you cut government spending, all of that money goes out of the economy. Social Security, Medicare, this is what's keeping people alive and paying for everything from groceries to rent to toys for their kids at Christmas and their grandchildren. These are the things that keep the economy going. This is the wrong time to cut it. I'm okay with long-term cuts. I'm not okay with short-term cuts.
Well, you know, fundamentally, we have a difference of opinion on what drives the economy. I don't believe the government drives the economy. I believe the private sector drives the economy. When the government sucks money out of the private economy and into the unproductive government economy, you don't have investment, you don't have job creation, you don't have economic expansion, you don't have wealth creation. Those are the things that you want from an economy, and the government doesn't create those. So what we need to do is leave the money in the economy, bring the debt back into realistic proportion by reducing government spending, and let the private sector generate with the investment and the job creation the kind of building economy that we need to get ourselves out of the doldrums, to stop flatlining the economy and to move forward and give the 8% fake wink wink number of unemployed, but the real number is about 16% of unemployed.
No, it's not that.
You know, the U6 number is 16%.
Here's how you know that the reason for the flatlining has everything to do with government spending and not private growth. I'll tell you why. Under President Obama, we have seen records of private growth. We have seen month after month after month of private growth in jobs going up and up and up. Where do we see the decline? In government jobs. As you know, the Republicans forced the states, all 50 states, to fire workers, to fire teachers and firefighters and police officers, to cut their budgets. President Obama didn't want them to do that, but the Republicans said, no, we want states to raise their taxes. We want them to cut government workers. The decline in government workers, that's what you see under President Obama to a very low level. That's what's harming the economy.
The federal government didn't force the states to do anything.
Sure they did.
Nowhere in the Constitution that you and I absolutely love do I find and hear the place where the federal government is responsible for bailing out the states when they've been recklessly irresponsible with their budgets and have driven themselves to the point of being in deficit. It's up to them to find a way to fund their own priorities, not up to the federal government to keep states running. Find it in my Constitution. I can't find it.
Mike, it's not required, but it's wise, because in times of hardship, every government has trouble, right? In times of hardship, whether it's Europe, the United States, or the state governments, less tax money goes in, more welfare money, unemployment money goes out. That's true internationally. It's a basic economic principle. The difference is this. The United States can print money, the states cannot. The euro can be printed, but Greece, at least right now, can't print its own money. When you can't print your own money, you need a bailout. That's why Greece needs a bailout from Germany. That's why the states need a bailout from the federal government. I don't support states printing their own money. I support doing exactly what President Obama would do in hard times only, giving states the money they need to get past the recession-induced deficits.
Well, you know, first of all, it'll never happen what you're saying because the states will never act responsible.
No, it happened under the stimulus package.
In good times, what do the states do? They rake it in and they spend it in pet programs and ridiculously high spending. You know, you can't show me a single state that sat there and filled their coffers with a rainy day fund and reduced the actual spending during the economic good times. It doesn't happen.
Well,
we have irresponsible people in government. We have to stop them.
Let's talk about a single state, because the state of Indiana had a primary just last week, and in that primary they rejected the longest-serving Republican in the United States Senate, Richard Lugar, someone who's generally respected, certainly a strong conservative, votes conservative the vast majority of times. This is not a guy that is known as a moderate. This isn't someone like Susan Collins or Olympia Snowe that's known for crossing over and voting with the Democratic Party. It's a solid conservative, and instead they elected by a landslide the state treasurer, Richard Murdoch, who said, I'm not going to compromise with Democrats, ever. Let the country become a basket case like Greece.
Well, I don't think he said that.
He said, basically, I will never compromise, because basically Murdoch puts his party ahead of his country. He said, if the Democrats want to compromise, they have to agree with me 100%, which, I got to tell Richard Murdoch, is not compromise. To me, Richard Murdoch is the face of today's Republican Party.
Well, you know, Richard Murdoch will learn a lot about how the United States Senate operates once he becomes a United States Senator.
He may well lose to Donnelly, the Democrat, because he's such a radical right-wing Tea Party guy.
Indiana is not considered to be in play this year. It's not one of the states that
it is now.
You know, I don't think so.
Birch Bayh won.
Anyway, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why Dick Lugar lost. And you know, I've had the opportunity to work with his office for a long time. back when he first came to Washington was when I first came to Washington. He's a great man, a great leader. I respect him a great deal. I regret to see him leave Washington under such circumstances. Dick Lugar tried to stay around too long. He's 80 years old. He's out of touch with the people of Indiana. It's not just the Republican Party in Indiana. Here's a guy who hasn't lived in his home state in 36 years. He sold his house when he first came to Washington. That was a major campaign issue. This guy's representing us. He doesn't even live in Indiana.
He's got a farm in Indiana.
When he went back to Indiana, he stayed in hotels and he billed the government for his stay in what he was calling his home back in the state of Indiana. But reminds me a lot of a guy named Chuck Percy. I don't know if you remember Senator Percy from Illinois back in the late 60s, I believe, or early 70s. Been around for a long time, chairman of Foreign Relations Committee, just like Lugar was. He lost track of his home state, and the voters turned him out because he was a statesman, he was an internationalist, he was a great leader, he was the expert on foreign affairs, just like Dick Lugar, and he lost track of his home state.
I actually don't think Charles Percy was that great internationalist, but that's a side point.
He's chairman of Foreign Relations.
I understand. What Richard Lugar says, though, is not what you've said. What Richard Lugar says is that Richard Murdoch does not understand compromise, and he's going to learn the hard way that that's not how things work in the Senate. And to me, Murdoch represents the Tea Party, what Rush Limbaugh said. They want Obama to fail. And if the country has to fail with it, so be it. As long as Obama fails, as long as the Democrats fail, let the country burn because they've won their battle. And what they're doing is they're winning their battles and they're losing the war. They're losing the American people. There's a reason why Congress has a 9% approval rating and why the Republicans in Congress, Democrats have a low approval rating, but Republicans have less than half of that. Because Americans understand that they don't like to see the parties bicker, but they understand that Republicans are not the party of compromise. And frankly, this election typifies it.
Well, Murdoch certainly made hay in the primary on that. It was a good campaign message. I think when he gets to Washington, you'll find, like most people when they get to Washington, their governance behavior does not always match 100% their campaign rhetoric.
I think it'll match because that's what the Republicans are doing now.
On the other hand, as long as we're talking about no compromise, let's talk about, who leads the absolutely no compromise under any circumstance. Okay, Harry Reid, never a compromiser. Chuck Schumer wouldn't compromise if the future of Western civilization was at stake. Chuck Schumer would not compromise an inch. He is Mr. Everything for the party, nothing for the country.
Reid and Schumer and President Obama,
no compromise.
All of them have said that they wanted to fix the deficit long term, to have a mixture of taxes and cutting government spending.
And they won't do it.
And it's only the Republicans, and I remind you, every single one running for president on that stage, when all 8 were there, said they wouldn't even take 10-to-1. Spending versus taxes.
And they will.
So, they all said they wouldn't. The difference is that Schumer and Reid, you say don't want to compromise. Yeah. They are willing to compromise. And Republicans are not. The reason for gridlock.
And Senator Gillibrand in New York, when she was running for the Senate, said, I'm always going to support gun rights. And as soon as she was elected, she voted against guns every chance she got. Come on, Mark. Campaigns are different from governing.
No, but it's also, people understand that our country is in gridlock. The Senate and the House there have been fewer bills passed, frankly, fewer days worked. Harry Truman's do-nothing Congress has worked twice as long at this stage as the current Republican Congress in the House. They're simply not doing their job. They're sitting there recognizing that they think that the American people don't want the government to work. They think that they just want everyone to fight. It's not true. The American people actually want to see some kind of compromise. Keep your principles, but you can compromise here. That's what legislative horse trading is about. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill understood that. Mm-hmm. I don't think today's Republican Party understands.
No, it was
President
a different
Obama
era.
understands.
It's not today's Republican Party. It's today's politics, anything. There is no compromise from the Democratic Party. There is not much compromise from the Republican Party. It's a two-way street, and nobody's on the street. Look, the Republican House of Representatives was elected in the last cycle. The country asked them to go there and stop the excesses of the Obama administration. They've been partially successful in stopping the excesses of the Obama administration. They haven't been completely successful.
I don't think the American people like what they've done at all.
I think we're willing to take the record of stopping the excesses of the Obama administration to the polls, and I think we're going to be fairly successful with that.
The Democrats are going to keep the Senate this year, is my prediction. I think we have a chance to win back the House because I don't think American people like what the Republicans are doing. We'll see. One last issue I want to talk about, though. And this is a perfect issue that tells you why Republicans are when they're not compromising with Democrats. And that has to do with the Volcker rule. Now, you know, Mike, that Paul Volcker is one of the most respected men in America. As an economist, as a former chairman of the Federal Reserve, people might complain about Alan Greenspan or Ben Bernanke. Very few people will complain about Paul Volcker. He served under Jimmy Carter and was reappointed by Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. And this is a man who single-handedly is credited with ending the great stagflation of the 1970s when we had both unemployment and high inflation. Very respected man. And Paul Volcker says that banks should not be able to gamble with taxpayer money. He says that it should not be the case that banks can go to Vegas and put $100 billion down on a bet, and if it goes in one direction, they get the money, and if it goes in the other direction, we taxpayers have to bail them out. Let me suggest to you that J.P. Morgan, one of the safest and most respected banks, the CEO, Jamie Dimon, is the guy that was supposedly safely kept J.P. Morgan out of the worst excesses of 2007, 2008. The London whale, Bruno Ixel, one trader in London, bet $100 billion on J.P. Morgan's account and lost $2 billion in a week. If these kinds of trades are allowed to occur, we're going to venture right back into 2008 land. I want you to support the Volcker Rule.
Well, here's what I'll support. First of all, I thought Dimon did a good job yesterday on the Sunday talk shows, accepting responsibility and saying that
many CEOs would not do that.
Saying egregious mistakes were made. He's got to find out how they made the mistake. He's got to fire the people who were involved in it, and he's got to do it quick. I heard 3 people were supposed to go today. I didn't catch up whether it happened or not.
I'm happy to fire the London whale.
They have to put procedures in place where the London whale can't bet.
There's some London guppies out there.
But that's an internal thing they need to do. We don't need the government telling them how they handle it.
Now we're lucky it's just $2 billion. Next time it'll be $200 billion.
We are. And you know what we need to stop? We need to stop this mentality that anybody's too big to fail. If J.P. Morgan wants to bet their future on one bet and they lose it, bye-bye J.P. Morgan. Sorry.
It's not just bye-bye J.P. Morgan. What we learned from Lehman Brothers, what we learned from AIG, is when these massive institutions fail, they take us all down with them. The point of the Volcker Rule is to separate the stuff that they gamble with and the stuff that's taxpayer-protected, FDIC insured. I don't trust corporations to police themselves. You do. That's where we differ.
We didn't handle it right. Rather than bailing them out, if we let them go into bankruptcy and let the healthy banks that didn't do that go in there and pick over them and buy the pieces that were still operational and worthwhile, that's the answer to the whole thing, not corporate welfare bailouts.
There's no time for that. As we learned from Lehman Brothers, when the economy was falling off a cliff, that's the one thing that George Bush and Barack Obama had to agree on. They had to bail it out. Let's try to prevent it from ever happening again. That's it for the Inside Scoop. It's a short edition. If you want to check out more, go to marklevinetalk.com. I always welcome your comments. We are here every Monday right here, and we'll be right back next week.